During my tenure at TIR, I was invited onto a news program to debate e-scooter legalization in the UK. So we're in a situation that's a little bit fuzzy. People don't really know or acknowledge the illegality of e-scooters. The cat's out the bag. People are riding them everywhere, but they're not regulated. The other person who was invited to speak gave a story about why they felt e-scooters should be banned, putting aside that they were, and that clearly doesn't solve the issue. Their story and their example was about being in a local park and seeing some young guys, some young boys out on e-scooters. And they said, you could see it in their eyes. They were out for fun. And I just thought, oh my gosh, in my capacity right now, in the hat that I'm wearing, who I'm representing, I cannot sit here and say, excuse me, what is your problem with children having fun?
Thanks, Georgia, for coming onto the podcast. You know, besides all the little like time zone shuffling we had to do.
Thank you for accommodating, and thanks for inviting us to join this.
For those who don't know you, are you able to do a little bit of like a 30-second elevator pitch of yourself, essentially? So your name, your title, and the organization that you work for.
Absolutely. So my name's Georgi. I'm the founder of Loud Mobility. I've been working in shared mobility, micromobility, sustainable transport more broadly for the last 7 years internationally. So most of my career has been spent working on bike sharing, e-scooter sharing, light electric vehicles sharing models in cities all around the world. And what I discovered in delivering that work was where the most impact was made was where you had cross-sector partners from public, private, third sector, all working very clearly with a mission to create that impact of greater accessibility and value out of these transport systems. And so I set up Loud Mobility to very much focus on doing more of that. So we're essentially working on cross-sector projects, and our mission is to raise the volume of joyful, sustainable journeys, with joyful being a really important operative word and a kind of specific niche that we've carved out for Loud Mobility is that ability to focus on well-being, enjoyment, positive experiences. You know, in that what we're wanting to do is raise the bar of what we talk about when we talk about accessibility and inclusion in transport systems, that it should be about positive experiences, not achieving bare minimum of the opportunity, or even worse, you know, talking about things like your safety as the holy grail of what a transport system should provide to you versus the bare minimum. So that's the position we occupy. We've been doing that for about just about a little over a year now. And we've worked on some pretty cool things that I'm excited to share more on.
When did you start Loud Mobility as like an idea of a timeline? And was there a particular like nexus point for you personally as to why you started it? Because it sounds like a really kind of powerful or like somewhat personal mission.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I would say there's kind of probably three different moments that come together into answering that question. Because it wasn't a kind of straightforward, this is the business that we're going to start.
Never is.
I can imagine. I'm sure you're having a lot of conversations similarly. I think no founder is like, you know, I had my 5-year business plan in my head and just need to write it down and get started. But you get there in the end. The first thing is that a really good friend of mine from university actually it must have been 2020, approached me with an idea in the cycling space. We came together to discuss this idea. We set up the entity. We started exploring it a little. And then I took a new job. He took a new job. Bought a flat. He had a baby. And life kind of got in the way. And so we had this entity. So that was in 2020. We set up that actual entity. And it was dormant for a couple of years. while I was busy working at Tier Mobility. So I started there as head of cities, looking after the commercial side of the business. And then eventually, I quite quickly moved into being the general manager for the UK and Ireland. So looking after all of our operations. It ended up being about 21 services across the UK. That, of course, took full focus. We were involved in the e-scooter trials that took place across the UK. Huge amounts of acquisition and mergers that happened during my tenure, with some really interesting purchases from other businesses. You know, that takes me then to the second aspect of actually answering your question, which is about, let's say about a year and a half ago, had a lot of life change. I lost somebody very close to me, had to deal with my grief. And I was also in a position where I was able to discover that I'd been living with undiagnosed ADHD. Just this huge amount of kind of life change and reflection that happened in a very short space of time moved me into the decision of stepping down from my role as general manager at Tier. And my intention at that time was to take a career break, knowing full well that I would stay in sustainable transport and mobility. It's a real special interest and passion area. I've not been able to find another area that allows you to make as direct and as immediate an impact as transport does. And I set about just kind of having open conversations with people in my network about ideas and missing pieces and things that wanted to see change. And in a very short space of time, that accidentally became Loud Mobility. But the third aspect that I think is really important was during my tenure at Tier, I was invited onto a news program to debate e-scooter legalization in the UK. And I don't know how much listeners will know about the current status in the UK. It's confusing and complicated. We have trials that were supposed to be a year. They're now 3 years. They're happening in a small number of places across the UK. They're highly regulated to a level of, making it very difficult for people to utilize them easily. Private e-scooters are technically illegal. They cannot be used on public footways and roadways and spaces. They can be purchased, however, and used on private land. So we're in a situation that's a little bit fuzzy. People don't really know or acknowledge the illegality of e-scooters. The cat's out the bag. People are riding them everywhere, but they're not regulated. So anyway, that's the backstory. We had this debate. I was, of course, there in my capacity as somebody delivering a service within the trials and was invited to speak about this topic. The other person who was invited to speak gave a story about why they felt e-scooters should be banned, putting aside that they were, and that clearly doesn't solve the issue. Their story and their example was about being in a local park and seeing some young guys, some young boys out on e-scooters, and they said you could see it in their eyes. They were out for fun. And I just thought, oh my gosh, in my capacity right now, in the hat that I'm wearing, who I'm representing, I cannot sit here and say, excuse me, what is your problem with children having fun? And I thought so much about this. I thought, who could say it? I thought about the public sector bodies that we work with. There wasn't anyone that I felt could have sat in that seat and said, actually unpicked all of the classism and other issues that are probably at play in seeing a problem in young guys having fun. I think Loud was also a lot about occupying that space and being able to say the things that, in my view, in particular in transport, there are some things that are all too often going unsaid. They're known, but they're not said out loud. Things like kids should have fun in public spaces. They should be able to do that without, fear of safety of others around them or safety of themselves, and be able to get into more of the nuance of these conversations that seems to be lacking at the moment.
It is very telling when somebody feels like the idea of the concept of fun and transport are two things that should not cross over.
It's so bizarre. It's kind of, and I think there is this kind of strange acceptance of really odd ways of discussing things in transport that we don't accept anywhere else. I had a panel recently where it was all about kind of changing people's minds about moving towards electric vehicles and sustainable transport. And one of the things that we discussed was how strange it is that in the space of transport, it's the only space of like public debate that we seem to just immediately accept that everybody is allowed to take a very selfish view. I am not interested in X, Y, or Z. Like, you hear these arguments all the time. Like, I don't cycle, so why would I support a cycling lane? And it's strange, you know. I gave an analogy of, you know, you're living in your local neighborhood and a new pizza place opens up. You're not going to find it strange if your neighbor's like, I don't eat pizza, close it down. That is not a normal response to things in the public domain that aren't built specifically for you. And I think we've got to help people come into the conversation with more of a community minded.
Yes, I don't know if the term translate outside of Australia, but there's something called NIMBYism, the not in my backyard ideology. And there's that classism aspect that's tied into it, particularly in Australia with like property and
Absolutely. We had some really interesting examples of this because transport is very political, and particularly right now in the current political climate in the UK, I'm sure in many places around the world, so it's always a hot topic, right? But there's real polarization in debate happening around you know, let's say pro-climate, pro-people, versus this idea of anti-motorism, anti-motorist that it seems to be peddled at the moment, which is super bizarre because I don't know anyone who classes themselves as a motorist as their primary identity. But still, there is this real kind of pressure in the political realm. It's incredibly political.
You kind of touched on it with the e-scooter programs and the micromobility sort of things, and with the government conversations as well. How do you collaborate or partner with public entities like local boroughs or councils or governments? And can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's integral to our work, and it has been integral to the work that I've done over the last 7 years. You know, in delivering bike sharing, e-scooter sharing systems, this is always and has for myself always been in really close partnership with local, regional, national authorities and government, largely because you cannot make these work in a vacuum. You absolutely need to have that cross-sector collaboration to deliver a system that is well utilized, is available, is, you know, providing the value that they're intended to provide. But it's a complex space because it's the only aspect of our public transport system that is still in this space of kind of private contracts, short-term contracts, no subsidy, and is still fighting. And it's a young industry still. There's still a lot of learning to be done and a lot of learning to be shared and best practice to be shared, but it's still very much fighting for its place in the wider public transport networks. And that requires being really closely partnered with and building in to the longer term kind of transport strategies and ambitions of the places that you're in. But also from the kind of user perspective and adoption and what makes these services work, you have to come at this from a place-based approach, understand your local community, what people's needs are, how they travel, where you need to be to be useful. But now at Loud Mobility, all of the projects that we deliver under that mission of raising the volume of joyful, sustainable journeys are cross-sector. So a lot of times our commissioning partner will be a local authority or a national government body, and then we'll be bringing in our kind of wider network, understanding of the private side, understanding of the third sector side, and being able to be a kind of neutral wouldn't be quite right, but to be in a position between the three where we have really good experience and understanding and awareness of the challenges and the opportunities in each of those areas, and basically helping them to work better together towards that bigger mission. We did a really great workshop with the Equalities Leaders Forum and Network at the Department for Transport. So that's the national government agency for transport in the UK. So we joined their Equalities leadership to deliver a full day workshop with various speakers, engagement aspects to talk about how team members across the Department for Transport can bring equalities work into their day-to-day work. We did an exercise kind of challenging how we measure what a good trip is and isn't. At the moment, a lot of kind of governmental decisions are made on measures like cost-benefit ratios and productivity outcomes, and how quickly are we getting people to the office, essentially. And so we did a little bit of an exercise challenging that thinking a little and trying to go a little bit deeper into, is it that binary in how we're measuring things? Another project that we've been commissioned on by TfL, Transport for London and London Councils, we'll be working with them and the e-scooter operators who are currently delivering the service in London on a stakeholder event to showcase the learnings from the last 3 years, showcase that actually the trial has set out to achieve this level of safety, this level of uptake, etc. And like, we've done that. We've achieved the aspects of why this national trial came in, and hopefully set the stage, helping them to set the stage to move stakeholders with them to a future focus of how do we now increase the benefits that come out of introducing sustainable transport systems.
But changing track slightly, you were recently involved in a pitch competition called EmpowerWISM. So just as a little bit of background for people who aren't familiar, EmpowerWISM is a pitch competition organised by a transport agency based in Canada called Movmi. I think in Vancouver is their head office. Venkatesh can yell at me later if I've forgotten that wrong. But the whole aim of the program is to basically highlight female-founded businesses and female-led businesses within transport and mobility. And you were part of that program. What was your experience with that program? What was the value to, say, your business? How was the experience and the pitching and all of those different components that make up part of that EmpowerWISM program?
Oh, it was an incredible experience, and it came at just the perfect time. You know, we're just over a year old now. At the time when it came around, we were very much in that place of really solidifying how we talk about the business, what the services are. We were revising our website. We were just about to launch our first campaign, and we just brought in a new director, my business partner, Kaz Canella, to launch that campaign, which also beautifully is very much focused on women. So there were kind of two sides of the empowering women in shared mobility that connected for us at the perfect time. We're a female-founded business, in fact, not by any intention other than hiring the best people for the job. We're a fully female team. In particular, how much the program just really focused on empowering and encouraging and growing and celebrating, and didn't look at female founders from this kind of challenge lens, but actually rather looked at how can we actually look at some female founder businesses that are really making an impact, and how can we support them to do more of that, versus it's really hard to be a woman and, you know, we want to pat you on for doing it anyway. It was a lot more empowering. So that really spoke to us. And then the other side of it is that all of the work that we're doing on raising the volume of joyful, sustainable journeys, by and large, focuses on increasing uptake in currently underfunded, underrepresented, undersupported demographic groups. And so we were just about to launch our She's Electric campaign, which focuses very much on supporting women to e-cycle with the hope of closing the ever-growing gender pedal gap. And so that was a real focus for us in putting forward our application. Was we're kind of coming at it from both sides, both empowering the team that we're building and the organization that we're building, but also in helping us to grow the impact of supporting more women to benefit from shared mobility.
There's been threads of it throughout the conversation, but I kind of always like to have one of the last questions to be around like future focusing and like, you know, horizon building. How do you envision the future of mobility and role and Loud Mobility's role in that future?
I would say I would like to see the conversation and the way that we converse and the way that we exchange information about transport to have changed, to have shifted. And what we're looking for is a real cultural and social shift, but we're also looking to really, our big vision is system change. And that is where we're talking about things like raising the bar of what we mean by accessibility and inclusion to go beyond bare minimums. So pushing the conversation forward in that way. From a systemic point of view and a much kind of harder metric point of view, want to enact some change in the actual measures that we're using of success in our transport systems. We want to see transport systems that are built around the needs of community, the needs of diverse communities, of intersectional individuals versus productivity in the definition of maybe one demographic group. But everything that we're doing is really laddering up to that longer term and kind of influencing policy, influencing social, cultural values around transport. And we'd like to see the sector reflect that better.
If you had to like summarize kind of everything we've talked about today, which is a lot, if it's like the cliff notes, if the person listening to this episode just wanted the cliff notes, what is the one key takeaway that you would want people to take away from this episode?
Hard. It's always a hard question. And I've been asked a similar question on a few panels recently, and it's so tough. I've been asked it in different ways. Like, generally speaking, my answers always come down to a very similar train of thought in a very similar kind of theme, which is all about kind of collaborating and being community minded in how we do things. What we've shared and what we've experienced over this first year of our operations is just how much you can make happen in a very short space of time with very little funding. And just, a good idea and a little bit of support when you are reaching out with a very clear mission, and you do it in a way that is collaborative and open and shared, because you know that the benefits will be shared. You can share things and they only get better and greater, and you don't need to kind of tightly hold on to things to own them. Versus come at it from a mindset of collaboration and community. Focus on the mission and what's going to get you there, and you will extract way more value out of that journey than just trying to retain ownership over something that really should be focused on maximizing the good that can come out of it.
So my last question: how can people get in touch with you or learn more? So this can be like a website, social media, and anything you kind of like to direct people towards.
All the above. We are communication heavy folks. We would love to hear from people. We love sharing ideas. The best ways are our website, loudmobility.co.uk. We've also recently launched she'selectric.org, which will tell you more about the She's Electric campaign, and will be our digital hub for lots of promotions and opportunities and events for women to get e-cycling as well. Open to all, open to absolutely everyone who is comfortable in spaces that centre women's experiences and needs. We are also on LinkedIn, Loud Mobility. We're on Instagram, also at Loud Mobility. DM us, send us messages, drop us a line in the inbox. We're all about collaboration. So the more that we connect, the better. And while we've probably spoken quite a lot about our UK focus and projects, we do work internationally. We've worked with folks on the African continent. We've been partnering with the Dutch Tourism Board. So we're really open to those really big picture opportunities, and actually are big believers in the importance of how much we can learn from sharing of best practice, and would like to support more of that happening into the UK as well. So that kind of exchange is also very welcomed. So please get in touch, reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, Georgie, thanks so much for your time and all of your knowledge and insight into all things mobility.
Well, thank you for the amazing questions, and again for the invite to join me today. It's been lovely chatting with you.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Bite Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.